we had like the monks coming in and doing a prayer at our home, blessing our home. And I remember my brother was telling me this, and he was saying that, the neighbors, I don't know if they called the cops, but I remember them having a gripe or something, where they're like, and then they thought we were Mexican too, because they've never seen refugees. I'll tell you, like people think this is like unreal, but it happened to my family, right? Yeah. Like I could write like a book of like the microaggressions we face and the growing up in the rural South.
Welcome to Love, Listings, and Legacy, where love, community, and building a lasting impact meet. We are Moni and Sophaline, a husband and wife real estate team, sharing our perspectives on life, real estate, and philanthropy, our stories about resilience and service. Join us each week as we share our journey of life, business, and giving back, all while building a legacy for our family and community. This is Love, Listings, and Legacy, where hearts, homes, and philanthropy come together. Let's get started.
Hey! Hi! Sabay Pinong!
We have on. I'm Sophaline Mao, and we've got
Rita Phetmixay from Healing Out Lao'd.
We are just two gals having such a blast, and we thought, you know what, let's just hit record. So, first of all, I want to say thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm Sophaline Mao, co-host of the Love, Listings, and Legacy podcast that I have with my husband, Moni. And today I am so honored. I'm so delighted. I'm just elated to have the beautiful and wonderful Rita Phetmixay of Healing Out Lao'd podcast.
Yay! Thank you for having me, sis. Kapchai Lai.
Kapchai. And I should say, you're welcome. I can say, Akon. But yeah, so we, we were just actually having conversation before we hit record just about the topics that we wanted to bring up today. And really, it's just, I feel like it's like just a celebration of us just being happy and talking about our healing journey and talking about some of our work that we've been doing. So first of all, before I get started, I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce a little bit about yourself to our Love, Listings, and Legacy audience and who you are, Rita. So take it away.
So my D to the, can I say triple L community?
That'll be the first.
I literally was like, wow, that's an amazing title. So Love, Listings, and Legacies. It's been an incredible honor to be invited to speak to your community. And so I come here as a daughter of refugees, particularly from Laos and Thailand. My mom from Isan area and my dad from Luang Prabang. I'm currently a licensed mental health practitioner, and I have a podcast called Healing Out Lao'd that focuses on healing and Lao diaspora storytelling and bringing in tools for sustainability for our community. And particularly from the Lao diaspora lens, because a lot of us, growing up in the Lao refugee community, we have been silenced. And ever since, the war that took place, and the ending of it in 1975, I think this is an incredibly important topic for us to talk about 50 years later and to redefine what healing, what resilience, and what storytelling is as part of that matrix. And so, I'm just here to have this beautiful conversation with you, sis, and to highlight, some of the movement work and the important conversations 50 years later.
Absolutely. That was so beautiful, Rita. Thank you. And I just want to say how proud I am as an older, sis of just this diaspora that we're all a part of, as a 1.5 generation. I'm just so proud of you and the courage and the passion that you have for sharing the Laotian American experience, right? And then talking about our shared trauma, as a community.
Yeah.
Laotian Cambodians, we may have different type of experiences just from our history, but I feel that as a community, we can all understand the impact of historical trauma on us. And then just healing and what that healing means for us as the daughters. And I love how you introduced yourself as the daughter of refugees. And just like you, I too, the daughter of refugees, as well as being a refugee myself, a very young refugee. But I'm really excited for today because we get to have a very real and raw, intimate conversation about mental health, resilience, and how we want to honor our history. So for yourself, as the host of the Healing Out Lao'd podcast, I listen to your episodes, and every episode, I just want to say, has been so inspiring and empowering in some way. And although some of the topics that you bring up are quite heavy emotionally, they are necessary, especially for someone who's ready to kind of confront that history. And everyone has their time and place. So I just, first of all, want to just give my gratitude to you and all the immense work you've done as well. So thank you. Akon kapjai.
All good to you as well. And for bringing this up, when you first emailed me about having this conversation, it kind of took me aback and made me think about let's pause and reflect. This has been 50 years since the displacement and the war and the violence that have taken place generationally from our parents, our great-grandparents. And this is not easy work at all to be able to confront and to name these heavy conversations, but it is necessary. And kind of what, drives me to do the work that I do, because if not me, then who? Is always the question, right? And I think we're at this age now, I'm in my 30s, where there's no one else, right? I'm thinking, of course I have my community, but I'm thinking about the older 1.5 or first gen folks who've organized. They are tired. So,
we are, girl.
And so let's keep it real. Right. And I'm like, those are the people I looked up to. Right. And I was so grateful for them leading a lot of the, for example, Lao American Writers Summit, or LANA, that Laotian American National Alliance organization that does a lot of political education awareness. There's so many other people before me that have helped empower me to continue this work, which is why I'm here today. And obviously, we can talk more about my family too. That also is what leads me to do what I do today.
Absolutely. I love it. And I just love how you combine just the history, but also with kind of the modern day things that, our generation goes through. So with that said, Rita, would you mind maybe just kind of, bringing us back to your childhood and kind of, obviously you mentioned you are American born of Southeast Asian descent, with your mother being from Isan Thai and your father. So, what was that experience like for you as young Rita, little Rita? I think our childhood really molds how we are. So share with us
it's funny because I remember I have flashbacks of memories of living in a very small apartment in California. I think it was either Sacramento or Chico, can't remember, but us running around so much without any shoes and my toes bleeding, and my parents are helping me clean up my toes. And then my parents also speaking Spanish, as one of their languages when they first came here, landing in, North California. So I have that kind of blueprinted in my memory, and just remember us, playing with, our neighbors and their kids, and didn't really know what was going on, really until our whole family moved to North Carolina, I think in 96. So I was, barely, I can't remember if it was 3, 4, 5 years old, but I remember my dad sharing with us that there was a lot of gun violence. There was a lot of gang violence, a lot of drug abuse that were happening in NorCal. And a lot of Lao parents were bailing their children, teenage children, out of jail. And I remember those conversations that my dad was just having with us at the dinner table, was saying I cannot raise my children here. It's not a safe environment. Yeah. So I'm going to go to the East Coast to figure out there's other safe environments to raise my children, right? And you think about our history of violence. Laos is the most bombed country in the world per capita. Cambodia was also bombed. Yeah. Vietnam was bombed, right? All of Indochina was bombed. So let's just name that
Yeah, let's just say,
my parents did not escape a bombed country to come to face more gun violence. So that was kind of like the scene, like just painting the scene. And then, my dad went to a lot of different states in the East Coast, Ohio, Georgia, Virginia, and found North Carolina to be the quote unquote safest, it's the safest state at that time to be able to raise, our children. So we had 3 of us then. My youngest brother is the only one that was born in North Carolina. He's my baby brother. He's like 12 years younger than me. But, most of us, the first 3 were born in NorCal. Mm-hmm. And we did not know then that, what we would trade off would be racism that happened in the South. And right. It's like, either risk getting shot or, macro aggression, right? Or being treated discriminately or having prejudice against you, right? It's like life or death versus like, okay, I can deal with this. So I grew up in a city where the zoo was at in North Carolina. So if you ask anyone, like, do you know where the North Carolina Zoo is? That's the town I grew up in. Less than 20,000 people in that. Wow. So small town. Let me tell you, small town. I'm in LA right now. And I feel like I've always been like a city girl for some reason, but I grew up in a small town. So that's kind of what painted my picture of, the world. Was that, people did not look like me growing up. People were, white. So, and it wasn't until college that I discovered like, oh, I can have like a really close knit group of people who are Black and brown, but I didn't have that, in my primary years. So I navigated that in a way that like kind of like forced assimilation with a lot of us who, we think about generational trauma. It's like our parents are just trying to make sure that they're, belonging in this state because they were displaced from their former countries. Yeah. You think about like how, like, I don't want to mess this up because where else am I going to go? I have to, give praise to the United States for taking us in. Yeah. But then that means giving up a part of your culture. Which was, really heartbreaking to say the least. And so a lot of the work that I do now, it's all about embodying our culture because that's part of the healing process, right? When you realize that your culture was never meant to be, isolated or judged or being criticized, right? Like your culture is, yeah, like it's beautiful, right? Being able to celebrate Lao New Year. Like I didn't celebrate Lao New Year till I was like an adult. I didn't really know about it till like my 20s. Yeah. Yeah. No. I remember our neighbors. We had like a bon. You call that in Khmer too, like a bon.
Yeah, bon. Yeah.
When we moved to our house and my parents bought it in Ashboro, and we had like hella cars coming in, right? Very communal people. And we had like the monks coming in and doing a prayer at our home, blessing our home. And I remember my brother was telling me this and he was saying that, the neighbors, I don't know if they called the cops, but I remember them having a gripe or something, where they're like, and then they thought we were Mexican too, because they've never seen refugees. I'll tell you, like people think this is like unreal, but it happened to my family, right? Yeah. Like I could write like a book of like the microaggressions we face and the growing up in the rural South. But like we had like a whole celebration and we were demonized for it. It's like, and then we were, thought we were like Mexican. And then, I remember a comment that one of the neighbors said like, oh, I'm not racist. Right. And then insert racism. But I'm not racist. I just don't like it when, they have more than, people that's appropriate to be in a house or something like that. So
it's a ceremony. It's not every day. It's a ceremony to bless the house and your family. Mm-hmm. It's like having Christmas or like a Super Bowl party or like Easter Sunday when you have your family.
Right.
Or
we're not allowed to congregate?
We're not allowed to just because
only white spaces are allowed to? What?
Yeah, or like the holidays that you think are the holidays, you know, like, so yeah, no, Rita, I'm with you too. Even like for us, like Khmer New Year, obviously we celebrate Songkran, you know, the Southeast Asian countries. And yeah, you know what? Our New Year is in the middle of April. Yes, it is.
That's right. That's my true New Year. Okay. Yeah, I don't say Happy New Year January 1st, okay?
You know, thank you for sharing about that. You know, it's really interesting when you talked about like North Carolina, but even some communities in California, especially if you're in a city that isn't familiar with Southeast Asian culture, you know, they may kind of like, it's different, it's new. And so you kind of, sometimes people either are like, wow, that is so cool. Like, let me learn more about it. And then you get some people who are like, oh, like that's different. So it must be bad because it's different. And so, you know, just to kind of piggyback on what you're talking about, like I grew up in Stockton where it was kind of opposite of what you experienced as a child. For us growing up in Stockton, it was nothing but Southeast Asian culture.
You're lucky, okay? You're lucky.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, just to kind of share with that, I don't know, some of our listeners, you either could say, you know, like grew up like Rita, where you were like a minority in a very small town, or like someone else like grew up in Stockton, Long Beach, Oakland, Sacramento. You know, for me, Rita, honestly, like I always knew I was Khmer. I grew up in Stockton, you know, like my parents, like we arrived in the US in Seattle, Washington in like 1980. I was like 5 months old. And already my parents found community. So the only reason why they left Seattle, Washington, because of the climate, they're like, all right, America's too darn cold. Like, we got to get out of here. And, you know, obviously, just like your parents, a lot of our Southeast Asian refugee families also found secondary migration. And that was often family reunification. It was also economic opportunities. And just like your parents, safer communities. Because, hey, if I just dodge like bombs and landmines and guns, like I raise my children in that same environment, you know, and whereas some other families, like, you know, my parents, they found Stockton, California to be home because of community. Yeah. You know, in the 1900s, like Wat Tamararam Buddhist temple, which is now the big temple in Stockton, that started, Rita, in the 80s. And it was just a trailer home. I remember being 5 years old and, for New Year's, my parents, you know, bringing me to the temple, and it was literally just like a trailer.
Wow.
What it was now. So anyway, you know, just kind of sharing that with you as kind of like, we all have like those different experiences. And, you know, growing up, you always either felt super, you know, Lao or super Khmer, and you either embraced it or you either kind
rejected.
Rejected it. And you rejected it. And so even though they're Khmer, Chinese, they would often identify, oh, I'm Chinese, or I'm Vietnamese, or I'm whatever, you know, just because, you know, when we grew up in the 80s and 90s, we had a lot of issues with like Southeast Asian gangs. And so growing up, you know, in that era.
See, that's what we're escaping. That's what I'm saying. It's so interesting, right? How my dad, like literally that experience, my dad was like, I'm not going to raise my children here. Right. But we traded this for racism. Yeah. But, you know, how did y'all navigate that? And how did you address the gang issue? What do you remember about that time?
Gosh. So like think about like growing up in like the 90s, this was like the era of like, you know, hip hop and rap music. And it was like, all the different gangs. So it was the Southeast Asian gangs, like Latino gangs, Black gangs. And so everyone kind of had to find their place. And so for my parents, you know, Stockton was also very, it was about the neighborhoods. And even Stockton Cambodians are like, yeah, I'm from like so-and-so street. And that's how they kind of claim, like, you know,
very territorial,
like how hard you are, you know. And right. Parents, actually, we grew up in Stockton, but we were surrounded by more of like a smaller, we had Cambodian neighbors, but everyone knew everybody, and it was just a different value systems, you know, like I grew up around other my elders who valued education, and so I grew up around other you know, mongs, you know, like the elders, like the mongs, you know, they all went to like college. They went to Sacramento State or UC Davis. And for us as a kid, it was like, oh, like that's kind of cool. Like I want to go to college, like, cause they get to move out. And so for us as kids, we remembered them being the cool kids the cool older cousins or whatever you want to call them, like going off to college, and you're like, oh, they have their own car. Oh my God.
All this freedom all of a sudden, right? Independence, freedom was a privilege. Yeah.
And then they would come home for Khmer New Year or like Thanksgiving, and they'd be like, you know, like rocking their like Sac State, you know, sweatshirts, or like,
yeah, so much like pride going to university and colleges.
Yes. And as kids, we were like, I mean, for me anyway, I always idolized that. And so, you know, I often got like made fun of, like, oh, they call me like schoolgirl. I was like a schoolgirl. And so like, and then I, you know, of course I had friends who were, you know, they lived a more rougher life, Rita. Like they had a bit more, struggles with their family,
right?
Like parents just not being around. And so they found themselves, you know, like, I can see why like the gangs provided protection and family and a sense of like belonging and, your basic needs were met, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now I kind of understand at the time. I was like, man, they're just like gangbanging and cool. I was like a complete nerd. And so I found my place, growing up, you know, involving myself with like the Khmer student club at high school. I did.
Y'all had a Khmer student club in high school or college?
Yeah, in high school.
Oh, no way. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Dances. We did like the wishing dance, a coconut dance. We did like a fashion show. They had like a multicultural week. And I remember they had a Vietnamese student club, Filipino student club. They had like the Mexican American club. So anyway, Stockton was very diverse. So I would have to say I grew up feeling like I had no identity issues. I always knew I was Khmer. Angel Cruz Park, you know, Angel Cruz Park in Stockton is where they sell the, you know, the papaya salad and the beef stick.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a pride there too, but like navigating, you know, poverty, you know, I'm assuming, or just starting from scratch, you know, our families, my parents had a lean 25 baht, which was 50 cents in, you know, American money back then. So literally started from scratch. And for us to do what we do now, and you do real estate, I mean, that's incredible. You know, and I know in NorCal there's a lot of like pride in like where you're from, like the territory, like what's your, you know, there's like what 510, there's like 415,
209. I'm from the 209.
Okay, 209. I actually keep my area code, you know, from North Carolina, 336, because that's where I grew up. So I'm like, it's part of our identity, right? Like growing up in the diaspora. But I wonder what conversations for you have been important, like in your own community, because I know starting Healing Out Loud, conversations on mental health now became important, right? People are able to now name what it is. What is generational trauma, right? What does my self-talk look like, right? What is, you know, displacement trauma? What is historical trauma, generational trauma? And so, you know, now we're able to name that. You know, I wonder in the Khmer community since the Khmer genocide, and, you know, it's such a heavy topic, you know, ancestors have been wiped out, violently and whatnot. And so I wonder what healing has looked like in your community.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rita. Yeah. I mean, just on the topic of healing, you know, 50 years, and sometimes, it's either swept under the rug. So like a lot of times, like they don't want to acknowledge April 17th, 1975, because it's such a heavy, dark day. And I think our generation, we actually can actually confront it, because sometimes maybe because we didn't actually directly go through it. And so for us, it's, you know, it's not. And so like, for example, like, you know, my mom and my dad, like April 17th, 1975 was the day that they lost everything. So my parents are from Phnom Penh, the capital city. And when the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia, they went into Phnom Penh on tanks and with AK-47s and all dressed in black and with flags waving like Cambodia's been liberated. And it was a lie. It was a lie. And my mom remembers being a teenager and soldiers were telling them, pack your bags. The Americans are bombing the city. You need to pack enough supplies for 3 days. Don't take anything. Leave everything. You're going to be safe in the countryside. We've been liberated. And so it was all a lie. And for my parents, you know, because they were city folks, Rita, it was a different experience for them because they had to be displaced from their homes. So imagine like downtown LA, people just having to leave and walk out and take whatever they could. And so people like my grandfather burnt burnt their ID cards, burnt their uniforms. He was a government official. He worked for the ministry at the time. It was probably like the equivalent of like the Ministry of like the Treasury, kind of like the U.S. Treasury or whatever they called it, Ministry of Finance or whatever. And then my mom and dad, my dad was also a police officer. He was in law enforcement. And so anyway, you burnt your IDs, you burnt your uniforms. Some people even hid like their jewelry and money underneath the house because the Khmer Rouge were like, hey, just take what you don't need anything. You're coming back home in 3 days. You know what I mean? Like, just get out. And they were, like pointing guns and threatening people. And so my mom remembers as a teenager, like feeling like, well, if they're trying to liberate us and rescue us, like, why are they pointing guns at us? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And I didn't realize it until I got much older, Rita, that my mom always associated moving, like packing, with displacement. And it was stressful for her, moving. Right.
Yeah.
Like for us growing up here, we're like, oh yeah, like I'm just going to pack up and move to another apartment.
Right. Like a typical, like, just growing pains, just have to move on up.
I get some U-Haul boxes, some packing tape. Like, what's the big deal? But Rita, it took me this long to realize, like, you know what? Like, it brings her back to like being forced with AK-47s, So, and then that was my parents' experience, right? Like that losing your home and you never saw your home again, like my mom, like losing her father, losing her siblings, and my dad, losing his entire family, Rita, just because they were diplomats. A lot of my dad's side of the family were diplomats. They had relations with the former Prince Sihanouk. One of my dad's uncle was the ambassador to Cambodia at the time. And, like, we got to go. The Americans are evacuating us. You got to go. And like forcing my dad, like, are you staying or are you coming? Like, are you coming? Or if you want to come, you got to go now. And like for my dad, he couldn't leave my grandma, his mom. And so my dad didn't evacuate with the U.S. Embassy and his uncle. He stayed and he, of course, got, went through the Khmer Rouge and things like that, Rita. But those are just some stories that I grew up just hearing all the time, like I'm sure like for you, your parents, when they get together, right? They meet and they start talking about.
Yeah.
I was in that labor camp. And
re-education camp. We used to call, what I heard growing up was seminar, right?
Yeah. Seminar.
A re-education camp for the new way of life. And I can't remember if it was like 4 months or 4 years. I think it was the years. But I know that's a big difference. But my dad went through many re-education camps and he finally escaped after some time. And he was also a nurse. He that was his role to be able to help, the other folks out. Like he became a nurse. And he finally escaped and he didn't tell any one of his family because, if they knew, they could potentially go and kill his family. But he was a person, he was in guerrilla warfare. And so he was part of, the rural side, not the communist regime, obviously. Yeah. And so he had to change his whole identity to Putan, Phetmixay. Yeah. Phetmixay means fighter. So, that he set that precedent, ever since he escaped. He swam to Thailand and then got caught by the Thai police. Yeah. And he was like, it was just like these stories.
Yeah. I feel like our diasporas feel the same feels, it's very similar, right, Rita? Just different circumstances, but just like you, like your father was a nurse and, in Cambodia, they executed, doctors, nurses, teachers, artists.
Gosh, anyone with a high degree.
Anyone. You wore glasses. You looked smart. You looked Vietnamese. You looked Chinese. You're light skinned.
I can't believe that.
It's funny. Like they literally, they had children soldiers. They gave power to the people from the countryside who were not educated and
right. They kind of like brainwashed them, And
so, when you talked earlier about just coming here and experiencing racism, for my parents, it started early when they got forced out of Phnom Penh into the countryside. Then now they're being persecuted by their own, Rita. It was like what the Khmer Rouge did was they kind of pitted people against each other, different classes, right? And so what they did was once they got you out of Phnom Penh, like they're like, all right, you're gonna go to Battambang, you're gonna go to Siem Reap, you're gonna go like different, like, you know, work in these different rice fields, and like you had to dig trenches or whatever. But they purposely gave the Phnom Penh people a really hard time. And so my mom remembers like that feeling of like being not accepted and being bullied and being just straight up persecuted for being from the city.
Wow.
That the city people were worthless. What are you doing for the country? All you do is drive your cars, listen to the Beatles, speak this foreign language, you know, which was French, like try to be Western. And so they villainized like modernization, and so my mom says she was like treated really poorly. They would like make them do horrible things because they're from the city, just, you know, just persecute them extra. Yeah. Always reminded them that they were worthless because city people didn't do anything. You didn't grow rice. You didn't plant anything. Like you didn't do anything to feed the country.
Right.
You know what I mean, Rita? So,
right. You were, you know, as your worth is tied to what you do, tied to production. So, yeah.
And because of their like focus on being an agrarian society and not, you know, dependent on like the West. And so a lot of times like modern medicine was abolished. And so like your dad being a nurse, like, no, like there was no medicine. Like that's why a lot of Cambodians died from disease, because they didn't believe in antibiotics. They didn't believe in penicillin. They didn't like, it was like, oh no, chew on these roots or herbal.
Right. These herbal things. And
they let you die.
Anything to do with the West was abolished.
And,
anything.
Yes. And their motto was to keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss. That was the motto. So you're going to stay sick, and if you're sick, my mom said, if you were sick and you couldn't work the rice fields, they would just let you die. And if you didn't die, they'd probably just force you into dying because they would just kill you eventually. And my mom said that there were times where like she got really close, and but anyway, a lot of that stuff I think comes out in how they raise us, you know, and how they also handle a lot of change in America, and then coming here just like your family, you know, facing racism, discrimination, being called all sorts of names back then.
You know, it's interesting because think about like displacement trauma and never finding a place of home. My parents actually moved at least 4 times in 1 year, where my brother had to go to 4 different first grades. And so, you know, he's doing well now, but just thinking about how, you know, what is home for us, right? In a place. And I think part of our generation, 1.5, second, now third generation, is cultivating that space here. We didn't have the privilege of being here 5 generations, unfortunately, right? So a lot of what we're doing is now hearing these stories, some of us for the first time, because, you know, as children, we don't know how to ask. And a lot of our parents who've been traumatized don't want to re-traumatize themselves, right? And so there's silence, and the shame grows in silence and isolation, right? And that's what I noticed until I came. So I grew up in North Carolina, but I came to grad school at UCLA in 2013 to do Asian American studies. And then I picked up social work later. So I did a dual master's degree. But, you know, in hindsight, I didn't know that I would do what I do now. But I just knew at that time that I needed to pick up more resources. I needed to pick up more skills to be able to help my community out in whatever way possible. Because my dad, I would say he's a very strong patriot of his country. And so when he lost, you know, the war, like lost, right? Like, and got displaced, cause it was either you stay and you die, right? You have the chances of dying, or you leave and you have to leave for, you know, your whole family behind. But, you know, like, you know, coming to UCLA, it really gave me language about what happened, you know, to my community. But no one else before has talked about, you know, and particularly in my Asian American studies courses, has talked about Lao diaspora studies. And so I learned about actually Long Ung. I forgot, what's her book titled?
First They Killed My Father.
Yeah. And then she has a sister that grew up in Cambodia, right? And she was the one who grew up in the States. And so, you know, it was so interesting because I saw a lot of parallels with that story, and a lot of us in the Lao diaspora, where my dad actually had another daughter with another, it was a different woman first, right? And I didn't know that until like high school, actually.
Oh, wow.
No, actually, I think at the end of like, sometime in college, I learned that I had a half sister. And my dad's like, oh yeah, you know, go visit her, you know, like you have to, it's your responsibility to take care of her because she is also my daughter. And so you all are, you know, sisters.
Oh,
and
older? She's older.
Yeah. So she, I think during when the war broke out, my dad left the country. She was 5 years old, but it was too dangerous to bring her. Yeah. So he made the decision to not. And there's a heartbreak when I heard that story, and I needed to know like kind of like her side and my family side. Cause I feel like, you know, in a lot of our families, there's a lot of family secrecy. We just don't know. And a lot of people don't want to tell the truth. And so for me, I was like, well, if you're not going to tell the truth, I'm going to find the truth. So it was funny because, you know, and I love my parents, but I know they left a lot out. Cause I'm like, how did mom meet you? Cause she's in Thailand. I don't understand how she came to the States because there was technically no war in Thailand, even though there's like taking refugees, right? So I found out. I went to Thailand in 2013. I graduated college right before I came to UCLA. I did a Eurasia trip. I got like a scholarship from college to go. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to Thailand and Laos as an adult because I've never been. And I'm trying to understand how my parents met, not from their lens, but some from another perspective, right? From my aunties in Thailand. So I'm old enough to ask these questions. I'm around like 21, 22 or something like that. Wow. And so I asked my auntie, my oldest auntie, who is my mom's oldest sister, who is kind of like her second mom. Yeah. And I was like, how did mom meet dad? And I was like, you know, tell me straight up, like, you know, well, not like that, but it was more so like just a genuine conversation. I was like, well,
I can handle it. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, how did they actually meet? And she was like, oh, your mom's very sly. Like she literally left and never told any one of us that she left. And we thought she was kidnapped because they have a human trafficking, a lot that's happening everywhere. No one's just talking about it, but in Thailand. So they thought she was trafficked. So they were trying to search for her for a whole year. And then they gave up. She was like, she's just dead. Like she's gone. Right. And then she calls them. So my aunt was like, you know, 5 years later, she calls from the United States and tells them, oh, like, by the way, I'm alive and I'm pregnant with my first child. Oh. Like, what would you do as the oldest sister who raised your youngest sister and found out that she was alive through a phone call, right? And in a different state. Yeah. So I came back and I asked my parents about that. I was like, oh, so mom just escaped with you, right? Like she left her whole family. She didn't tell any one of them. Yeah. And dad's like, he was laughing because he knew he was lying, like before, not lying or just withholding information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, oh, that your aunties can't keep a secret, huh? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I just wanted more of that story. And so I found that out and I realized like, there's just more to the story. And, you know, when I went to Thailand in fourth grade, because my whole family went, my immediate family, right? My brothers, my mom and dad went to Thailand fourth grade. I didn't realize that that was a trip to ask for forgiveness. My dad to ask for forgiveness to my mom's side of the family for quote unquote taking her during the war. Wow. And so, you know, and these things that you don't realize, like when you're like on survival mode, you just don't think rationally, right? You think about like, how am I going to get through this? Because my dad hit none of his side of the family came. He asked some of them like, hey, come to the States, right? Like, you know, you're not safe here. Like, come with me. And he's like, okay, well, if none of y'all going to come with me, I have to bring someone, at least one person. So that's where he got connected with my mom through her sister, who is kind of shunned from the family. And again, there's like a lot of dynamics here, but basically a sister, like mom's sister set her up. And with another like family friend, they didn't tell any of her sisters because she was like had 8 sisters. So only one sister knew and set my dad and her up. And she was telling them like, you know, before when my mom was like preparing to leave with my dad, she was saying like she was going to a library. She's like, oh, I'm going to go to a library and just never came back. And, yeah, escape with my dad. My dad actually pressured my mom, you know, to come, you know, survival mode. He's like, my mom tells me the story. He's like, yeah, your dad said like, if you didn't come with me, then I'm going to go in the jungle and kill myself. And so just thinking about like, how do you respond to that? You know, as, you know, a very young girl, I think she was like either late teens, like 19 or early 20s when she met my dad. My dad's 14 years older than her. Yeah. So my mom has a big heart and like super, super compassionate and understanding, and felt really, really bad for my dad. And so it's interesting because a lot of people don't talk about that narrative, or like I don't hear more of that narrative about, you know, the San folks and how they were also involved in the war, right? Even though they weren't directly impacted, they were indirectly. Yeah. And so my mom was part of that Isan region, and I grew up in a family. I didn't know why my dad would be like, your mom's Lao, she's not Isan, or she's not Thai. And I was like, then how come she's from Thailand?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I went to Thailand, and then I was like, I can't really understand my cousins. I can understand a little bit, but it's just a different dialect, you know, in Thai. And and then again, as an adult, I'm having to find out this information myself. I have to like really seek it out. And I think that's part of my own journey. I eventually created, you know, a film, Phetmixay Meets Fighter, to highlight my dad's story again, because I don't see Lao American films in mainstream media. But I think just to highlight, like my entire journey has been about just trying to understand what happened, because there is so much grief with not knowing, ambiguous loss, like thinking about the uncertainty. And so many of us in the diaspora don't even get this information, right? There's so many of us who are in second generation, who are American born here. Like my parents don't talk about anything about the war. And how sad is that? How heartbreaking is that to not know about your own history, and how violent, and not to understand your own mental health, you know, history too, about like, well, I don't know why I'm depressed. I just feel depressed, right? Yeah. Like I'm always anxious. I don't know why I'm an anxious person. I was like, well, let's talk about the historical trauma, right? Let's bring that into the picture.
Yeah. And I love, first of all, thank you for sharing that about your parents. And I too know that many of us have so many family stories that just either get buried, like just emotionally, because they don't want to bring it up, you know, and even just thank you for sharing that. I mean, but it sounds like it worked out. It
sure did, right? Like it's so interesting. Like, but
skeletons. I was gonna say the skeletons come out because, like, just like you, Rita, growing up, we didn't know. We found out later. We found out later. My dad also had his first family before the Khmer Rouge. And so I'm actually the oldest from my mom. And so my parents, my mom and dad had three of us. So I'm like the Kawidang refugee camp generation, right? So I was like conceived after they went through the Khmer Rouge. And so I was born in Kawidang refugee camp in Thailand. I was born in the refugee camp when my parents were there. They had just barely made it. But yeah, Rita, just like you, I found out, my father had his family before, my older half siblings, and that was his first wife. And my dad and mom have a 25-year difference. And so and so my dad had previous children because he was a lot older, and he, obviously, and then he met my mom later. Actually, they met during the Khmer Rouge, and my mom tells stories of how my father helped to save my grandma's life, my mom's mom, and so how she kind of like, she's like, yeah, well, he's older, but at least he has a kind heart. And it's just funny, like, just when your parents, when you're old enough and you're like, why'd you fall in love with dad? Or like,
right.
Like they're so shy to like share. But yeah, no, it's just when you brought that up, it's like there were so many stories that I had to learn. And then just like you, I had to go on this like self-discovery. And so like traveling back to Cambodia and like talking to my older siblings and like, oh, what was dad like, when he was like a younger kind of dad? Because, I knew him when he was a little bit of an older dad because, we got to care for him more later on in his life. And then until he died in 2008. So we knew him more as an elderly dad, not elderly, but older, right? He was older, but my other siblings knew my dad when he was like, young, dapper, and he was like in his 20s, and
right. Those are two different versions of him.
Different versions of dad. He's like big, strong hero. He's like a lot like, Cambodian national police officer. He was always gone because he did security detail for the royal family, the Cambodian royal family. So he was always gone here and there. And I'm sure, I don't know. I think I got some siblings out there that I probably don't even know about.
Right.
But back then, he grew up in Cambodia during French. It was still kind of under the French protectorate. And so, he was born in 1933. And so he grew up in the 1940s.
Wow.
And a little bit about the Japanese occupying Cambodia because of the, World War II, but he was a young boy. And then he grew up, just in the 50s. So his like vibrant years were like the 50s and 60s. And my mom always teasing. She's like, yeah, when I was born, your dad was already like, popping out his first kid or like having his first kid. So anyway, Rita, yeah, it's beautiful. And sometimes you have to be on that discovery of like, what's my family history? Like how, and my genetics, like, do I share it with like how many other people share my genes?
You find out the family reunion.
But anyway, to that point, and then, in 1990, Rita, my dad went to Cambodia. And at the time, there wasn't a U.S. embassy in Cambodia yet. At the time, if you wanted to go, you had to go to Thailand. Like you had to fly to Thailand, go up to like Laos or Vientiane and take a boat down the Mekong or something like that. It wasn't like how we just hop on a flight now and connect in Singapore and end up in Phnom Penh. At the time, it wasn't like that. But you know what? We didn't know at the time why dad, went, but you know what he did, Rita? He went and he found a long lost daughter. He found he found my half sister. This was his second wife who died during the Khmer Rouge. Like this is probably, I'd say, looking at the timeline, is probably like a year or two before he met my mom, but she died during childbirth when they were evacuating from the city. And so never forgot her. And then, in 1990, he went back and he found her. He found her. Probably looks just like my dad. She does.
Yo, tell me why my sister looks more like my dad than any of us. Yep. I was like, so we trying to figure out whose dad is that or whose daughter is that? Like,
you gotta do a DNA test. Yeah.
Listen, carbon copy. Yep. I'm telling you, like feet. I looked at her feet. I was like, oh, that's my dad's feet.
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. I mean, in your work now, I mean, understanding this history, I mean, I guess like for your generation, like, what has your work been in terms of like supporting our community through just this journey of, I feel like understanding your identity, understanding your family history, but how is that used to help you kind of heal and seek support services in terms of, like therapy and things like that? Yeah. What's your
Well, if you think about our community, part of our mental health issues is by suffering in silence. And I feel like that was my story up until I came to UCLA and I met other Asian American leaders, healers, and facilitators of, mental health, that I thought that I was the only one that was going through it. And I think a lot of us in the Lao diaspora, Southeast Asian diaspora, because there's a lot of mistrust in the community, we're not, able to be vulnerable and able to share our struggles because we also don't want to place the burden on anyone else. I think that's very cultural too, where it's like, don't lose face, right? And we have a term, siana, in Lao, where it's like, don't air out your dirty laundry too. Don't make me, embarrass me, in front of like the other family. And so, it took me up until grad school or even after grad school, I was very angry activist, like scholar activist in grad school. Cause once I was able to feel my feelings and understand, like how violence, impacted, the way that, the fabric of, who we are today, it really put, a lot of things into perspective for me about mental health. And I was gaining more knowledge and understanding of what that was, but I don't think I fully understood it until, I met my supervisor, Nikita. And again, a lot of amazing Asian diaspora women, that helped uplift me. But I just remember my time with Nikita and her compassion really helped set me free. of my own internalized shame and negative self-talk, because I didn't think that I was enough. I based my worthiness off of productivity. I used to listen to my dad sharing about oh, you're lazy. You wake up at 9, 10 a.m. Like, that's lazy. Right. And, and that negative self-talk really, kept me in a place of being imprisoned in my own mind. But when I was able to just show up, as my full self, and even if I didn't feel well, or even if I had any type of, a bad day, I would still receive compassion. And, it took me a full year to really recognize how healing that was, to receive compassion, not to receive more animosity.
Yeah.
And so once I was able to achieve that and understand you are able to heal from past traumas. You don't have to be identified or overly attached to your past traumas. But first we have to talk about it and we have to name it, right? To be able to tame it. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what I did was, growing up, and, going to UCLA, making my documentary was all about my personal experience and really documenting that to be able to help other people share their stories as well. But then I realized I want more of a family space. Mm-hmm. I want other people to come on, because I was also connecting with other Lao diaspora folks in LA or in SoCal or in California. And I was like, we have so much, to share, and we have so many, common themes within our own traumatic, experiences and stories of domestic violence, abandonment, neglect, poverty, sexual violence, DV, interpersonal violence. I was like, we need to be able to talk about how we have overcome these things and are still overcoming it in order to not stay stuck in the past. Yeah. Because, violence wants us to keep us down and wants to tell us that we're not enough and that we're not worthy. But when we talk to each other, so I, was able to interview the homies. It started out like that. It's whoever I knew, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started interviewing other people in their diaspora. And once I shared my story, my first story, because it was very scary. It was very vulnerable for me too, because I also named, my sexual violence history. I named domestic violence. I mean, systemic violence and historical violence. All this stuff is not easy, but when facilitated in a safe and healthy manner, it can be very liberating. And so I felt empowered. I was in my own healing journey, hearing all these other stories. And so I only want this to be a virtual practice space for people to know, right? And to have access to these conversations, because I have access to it. It's such a privilege to be able to know the people I know and to be in my position that it's only important for me to be responsible for that and to help empower other people to know that, hey, you're not the only one going through it, and that I see you, even though, we may not talk on a day-to-day basis, that you have this as a resource to know that you're not alone. So I think in my work, it's building, the capacity to be able to hold not only these virtual practice spaces or the podcast, but also I started doing started doing in-person healing and wellness retreats based in SoCal, just to, invite folks, in and to get a dose of what it looks like for Lao healing when we can come together and be in a community, right? Folks from I wouldn't say random places, because, every person's experience of where they grew up is important, but, some people from Ohio, from Canada, right? From Rhode Island, these places that may be very scarce in Lao diaspora community, right? So that they can build a familyhood, a sisterhood, to be able to take, for the rest of their life, to know that, hey, we don't have to exist in isolation, that we can be together and be okay with trusting each other, right? Once we're able to get the tools and the resources like I have, right? But I would never be able to do this work if I didn't be able to navigate and have the resources that my parents provided in which whatever capacity they could. So, knowing that, I just felt responsible to be able to facilitate this in the best way, to be able to, help liberate our peoples from the shame and the imprisonment and the oppression, that historical oppression, the generational trauma that we've been through.
Oh my God, Rita, I just want to say so inspiring and just so moving. And that work is the impact that you have on the community and helping others heal. And I think that is part of the service. That is part of your gift. That is part of your purpose, your calling, of why you're here and this journey, right? And I always think about like the access to that information. And for many of us, language also can be tough, right? So sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, like this needs to be in Laotian and Khmer and, in Vietnamese.
Yes.
Like if it's in local language, you have the local cultural kind of understanding as well. And that's one of the things. And, I just love how you turned your own healing journey into like empowering others. And that in itself is like truly empowering because you are serving, you're helping others, by for me and my husband, we've always wanted to do something to give back to our community in terms of like, is it knowledge, right? Is it advice? Is it whatever? And that's why we started
giving back.
Yeah, giving back.
Paying it forward.
Yeah, even that's why I said to him, I was like, you know what, like our podcast, who knows? We might reach one person. We might reach 10 people, but those people might be like, oh my God, you know what? Like I too grew up in this type of thing. And look, and it's just sharing with people so they don't feel alone and isolated.
Exactly.
Like you met my husband, Moni, like he is a direct survivor of the violence, right? And so he's 8 years older than I am. He's, turning, was he 52, 50?
Without giving too much away.
But to that, Rita, he grew up in that generation where it wasn't about like healing. It was about surviving. It's like, healing. Like I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to pay the bills. And so, coming to America and having to like fight to survive and like grow up in like these, very violent environments and growing up, around domestic violence and, just crime, and thinking like, oh, that's okay.
State violence and state sanctioned violence. That's what it is.
And for him. And, in our podcast, he's actually opened up a lot about just how, he was on how, his family's trauma came out in just, maladaptive ways of dealing with his father becoming alcoholic and not being there and just kind of say, oh, well, we're in America. It's better than Cambodia. So you kids figure it out. And, and having to deal with his own trauma. But now that he's like in his 80s, when we go visit him in Long Beach, we hear his stories. And I think because I speak Khmer fluently, Khmer is like 100%. I just can't read it right. But my communication with my father-in-law, he feels more connected to me and he tells me stories about like how they got out and what happened to his father and, how he was an orphan at like 5-6 years old and being raised by the monks in the Wat, he was raised in a Wat. He didn't even have a home. He was brought up in a Wat by monks.
Wow.
He lived off of the offerings of the villagers, and not knowing what it was like to have parents and have that warmth and that, like being nurtured. And so, anyway, it was just interesting for me, helping my husband deal with his own, traumas, Rita, and and then he became a police officer and, came to Livermore, and he was like the second Asian American police officer in 1995, and how he had so much chaos and so much pain and trauma growing up in Stockton that how he adapted was just a completely just escape, right? Like he left Stockton.
Disassociation. Truly.
And if you ever want, you can always interview him on your podcast. But he, he must talked about that moment where he's like, this isn't my life. I don't want this. I don't want this. And he left and he made up his mind, came to Livermore, predominantly all white community. And then he decided, at the time he had his 2 sons, and as a young police officer, young father, decided, you know what, I don't want my sons growing up in this environment. And so then he and his son's mom, they went through a custody battle and this and that, whatever. He ended up having the children and he brought them up in Livermore. And the opposite happened, Rita. Like they completely disassociated themselves, like did not understand or want to be Cambodian, and completely just adopted, the main host American culture, which is kind of, that's how they adapted, right? But then now, since we've been married, having my stepsons come home for Songkran, right? For like, this is what you do, come my New Year. Like we have an altar and we welcome the New Year angel and we get food together and we go to the temple and we honor our ancestors. So yeah, Rita, for for us as adults now, now me being a wife, being a stepmom, and a step grandma, we got a grandson.
No way! You got a grandchild. I see you're looking good. Okay, grandmama.
Yeah, but so I mean, I guess I'm sharing that with you and with our listeners is that it's never too late. It is never too late to teach someone their culture, to have them embrace their culture, and what used to be something of shame and pain. And like you said, like that suffering in silence doesn't have to be that way, but you have to have the courage and you have to intentionally want to learn about it. And so now, with my adult stepsons and with our grandson, bringing him to the temple, bringing him to Khmer New Year and teaching him how to put rice in the bowls for the monks and what that means. And, honoring your ancestors. And anyway, Rita, I feel like part of the healing journey is starting now. It starts now.
It's never too late. You can start today. You can,
And just like you do, I love what you said. It's like, if you can name it, you can tame it, and for me, as people think like, oh, Sophaline, she's, she had this amazing career in tech and she was abroad and she had this international career. I too come with my own traumas. I too have dealt with like verbally abusive relationships and emotionally abusive relationships and being told I'm never good enough. And then also as a woman, like I don't have children, Rita. I don't have children. And sometimes that in itself becomes a taboo in our culture because
it's looked down upon.
Oh my God, like how can you not want children? Like,
right. Right.
So, for me as a Khmer American woman, coming to terms with like not being married at an ideal age, Moni and I got married, I was 41, like never mind that I had this career and that I put myself through, just like you, a dual master's program. I went back I was 30 years old and everyone was starting. I was like, I want to go.
Let me just say, we are a gem in our respective communities. This is very different, but changing the narrative takes a lot of courage.
You can't listen to all the stuff that people feed in your brains. Like, I would hear comments like, oh, like, you don't want to be too educated. No one's going to want to marry you. You're going to, you're going to be so hard to marry off. And, I'm so grateful, Rita, that my mom and dad have never forced me to do anything that I didn't want to do. So
shout out to the parents. Give them some credit, right?
Mom and dad, they raised me to be very, what's the word? Like to be
outspoken,
very outspoken, but yet kind and gentle and respectful, but like yet define my own journey. And I do have to give that up to my parents as traditional. And I'm pretty Khmer, Rita. I'm very Khmer.
Yes, I feel that Khmer off the screen.
I'm very Khmer. Like up here, I'm also very like, no, like everyone has a journey, but I guess I share that for those out there who are listening, like you are enough. You are enough. And whether your community or your parents, your own family, you are enough. And I feel like a lot of times we need to hear that from each other. Yeah. We need to get that from each other.
Yeah.
You are freaking enough, sometimes our cultural values, they mean well, it's well-intentioned, but it comes across a bit, like offensive.
Yeah. Well,
take it with a grain of salt.
Well, you think about like the war and how that has, historically created so much fracture in our community. Sometimes we can tend to associate trauma in our culture, when in reality, it's like we have to look at the systems beyond us, the environment that created our families to be displaced, right? Our families to second guess themselves. Yeah. And so I think a lot of us may deal with, what quote unquote normal people can deal with rejection. Rejection for us feels really intense. It feels like survival. Like for us, like that sense of belonging and not being able to feel like grounded or found in a foundational space. And I think about, our parents is like, they did the best that they could. Some of them, there's some people contest that. Like, I don't think they did the best they could. And so that's real too, right? Some of your parents, maybe they didn't do the best that they could, and you know, cause a lot of like strife in the community. But I would say, you know, just to kind of like acknowledge, right, that some of these things are beyond you and beyond your family. And so instead of blaming each other, right, which is something that we were perhaps done to us, like from the States, it's like, this is your issue, this is your problem. It's just to look at the collective and see like, oh, okay, where in this system is not working for us anymore, right? And so we don't have to emulate what has not worked for us, even though it feels familiar. So that's part of like healing generational trauma. It's like, you know, just because, you know, I was abandoned or just because I was neglected does not mean I'm going to do that to my own child. I know how important it is to be present and to connect with them, to teach them about the culture, but not in a forceful way, but in a way that they actually will respond to it. Give them options, right? Because they're not only like, for example, Lao or Khmer, they're also American, right? And so we have to look at that in the context of things, right? And that we're not, you know, don't shame people for not being Lao enough or Khmer enough, right? There's also that dynamic of like, oh, like, you know, you don't eat sticky rice, you're not Lao. And it's like, bruh, like, I just, you know, it's actually for my health. It has a lot of carbs.
I know. I totally know what you mean. It's just like, we're always kind of pitting each other in these little like boxes where we need to accept each other as we are. And I think our generation's doing it. We have to lead the next generation, Rita. One day we are the elders. I am.
I feel it. All these gray hairs are coming in. Yep. You know, I feel it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like we could just go on. I just feel so like the warm fuzzies and so inspired by you. But I guess my question for you as we like start to like wrap up is like the next 50 years, like, you know, obviously, 50 years of us healing and just being super resilient. And some of us have struggled a little bit more, but you know, what do you see, in the next 50 years, Rita, like, and what's next?
Yeah, I see, you know, our foods, to say the least, are normalized. People know about Lao food. They know about Khmer food, because I think part of like, you know, culture is, you know, engulfed in, you know, the foods that we eat. And so that's also part of our healing, because when people can accept our foods, they accept who we are as people. I think, you know, there's going to be a lot more diaspora folks celebrating our culture, not just who we are, but they're going to know like, oh, like this is Southeast Asian New Year. And, you know, and not question it, right? It's going to be mainstream, and that's what it needs to go to. And there's going to be more interpreters, more mental health providers, healthcare providers that speak the language, that know what, you know, our community needs and does not question it, right? So we're talking about systems now, right? Like, so we, again, being children, adult children of refugees or being refugees ourselves, right? It's like we have the power to change these systems and to normalize our people's existence in this day and age, in whatever locale we live. So I feel like the more we push social media, right? Like your podcast, my podcast, a lot of people creating, you know, their own platforms. The more that, you know, we are able to heal in community with each other and talk about these stories instead of suffering in silence. So I see us going in that direction. What about you? What do you think? Just along the lines of what you said, Rita, I think, you know, I'm turning 45 this year, and you know, like, I'm embracing it. Get it, Bong! I see you. And not a day older. Yeah, I don't see it.
But in all seriousness, I see the same thing. I think this next generation, obviously, like just like being born here in the U.S. with access to information, access to education. I see this renaissance of coming back to our culture, coming back to our roots, and feeling proud, you know, and I love that is the fabric of what America is all about, you know, celebrating our different cultural backgrounds and celebrating our heritage. And I totally agree with you. I think food is a love language and getting into people's stomachs and introducing the cultural cuisine, for like Moni and I, we love inviting our non-Cambodian friends to our home, and we open up our home, and through that we share our food and our traditions and our culture, and that builds community. And I think what you said about social media being a vehicle is so true. I mean, just like your podcast, like Dorothy Chow, I absolutely fangirl her, Dorothy.
Shout out Dorothy. Dorothy's one. I've listened to her. Like, I think I was on only episode 4 or 5, and I was like so into the next story. It was like always a cliffhanger. I was like, I have to know what happens next.
I binge listened, Dorothy. But yeah, Death in Cambodia, Life in America. And I'm sure there's going to be so many more. And the other thing I was going to say to you, Rita, is I see also Cambodians in Cambodia. I follow a lot of just the stuff that happens there, and the content creators. They are so courageous. They are so innovative in how they are promoting Khmer traditions and culture, and also sharing the painful struggles and not sweeping it under the rug and making everything all shiny and bright and but bringing up a lot of those things. But they do it in such a humorous and tasteful way. A lot of the cultural things that maybe could be better. But yeah, that's where I see the next generation. And I have hope that our community is going to heal. And the one thing I want us to preserve our elders' stories and find a way to do that. And whether it's recording them or talking to them, taking them to lunch, I think, once they're gone, Rita, those stories are gone with them.
Yeah.
There's a way, like you doing your documentary of just like your own journey, you talking to your parents, or going to Laos and Thailand and talking to your aunties and finding
Yes. That's going to be my next mission. And also my other mission is also to somehow figure out a way. I know it's really tough in the political climate right now in the United States, but my sister to reunite with our dad. That's really important for me. And she's like telling me, and I communicate with her through Facebook. She doesn't know how to read or write, but we communicate in Lao. And my Lao is broken. It's not too good, but I understand what she's saying. But that's just something that's part of the healing process is, healing the fractures, right? The, within the family system and reuniting, and, I think it was so, powerful for you to share about your father finding long lost daughter, and the death of her mom. And I was like, and those are the stories that we need. It's like, we need to know like our history. We need to, mend those wounds. So, I think in the next 50 years, culture is the new rich. That's what it is.
That's it.
Right now it is it's like, it's rich. It's like we have culture. And so, people try to take our culture and try to twist it and do whatever they want to it. But we reclaim it back, and we have a voice now. We have social media as a tool to be able to reunite our people and to do it in, the way that fits us the best.
Absolutely. So beautifully said, Rita. Well, thank you. And I just want to leave with, how can listeners get connected with you?
They can follow Healing Out Lao'd. That's LAOD on every single platform. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok are the main ones. And then if they want to connect with professional collabs or whatnot, do Healing Out Lao'd, LAOD@gmail.com.
I love it. And I listen to your episodes on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, yes, that's right. If you want to listen to the podcast, wherever. Well, how I was like, well, my listeners, how can folks find you all?
Yeah. So my husband, Moni, Nop, and I, we have a podcast called Love, Listings, and Legacy. And we are just on our you are my 20th. But yeah, we're on, just like Dorothy, we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. But it's a multitude of topics, just on our, just relationships, marriage, family. And then obviously, because we are professional realtors, we feel that, educating our community about, home ownership and how that builds generational wealth, does impact communities, and also generations ahead. And then we talk about legacy, which is really, Rita, it's all about service. It's service to others. You know, we serve on multiple nonprofit boards, and because of our background as refugees, someone helped us. Someone helped us along the way. Many people helped us along the way through many philanthropic organizations. And so Moni and I just want to find a way to also now serve and give back to those who, you know, just need a little bit of a helping hand. And so we hope you follow our journey and follow Rita's. And I just want to say, Khop Chai Lai.
In Lao, it's Popin Yang is, don't worry. Auckland.
Thank you so much. You are just amazing. I have no words, but you are just incredibly amazing, inspiring, empowering in so many ways. And thank you again for your time today. And yeah, keep up the amazing work. And may all of you find your healing journey as well. So thank you all so much.
And thank you, Bong Sophaline, for, you know, just everything, just what you embody is so powerful. And, you know, I think it's so healing for the Khmer diaspora. And, you know, just redefining social norms in the community already says a lot about your bravery and courageousness. So thank you for embodying that in our, you know, Khmer, Lao, Southeast Asian diaspora. And I'm so excited for all the other episodes and what you're going to continue to do in service, you know, to our community. So, you know, Khop Chai Lai, and is it Akun or?
Oh yeah, Akun.
I'll mix it up. Akun Lalai. Oh, beautiful.
Oh my God. Well, thank you all so much. And thanks everyone for tuning. And don't forget to follow Rita, Healing Out Lao'd, and connect with us. Okay.
Yay! Bye.
Thank you for joining Love, Listings, and Legacy this week. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. Join us next time as we continue to navigate the path from adversity to success, one property and one purpose-driven decision at a time. Thanks for listening.